Alright everybody, now if you watched the last video, you know that we talked about the French and Indian War and what the result was. What was the result? Well, Britain wins, France loses, and France is completely kicked out of North America. That means that, and we used the same map in the last video, that this orange and yellowish area is now all controlled by Britain. Whereas before, this yellowish area, including going into Canada here, that was controlled by France. Now France is completely gone. They're out. Britain controls all this territory, including Canada. But now, here's a problem that Britain has. What should Britain do with the French-speaking population of Quebec? Because remember, Canada is pretty much just Quebec, all right? Let's think about it. This area right here, this is what's been colonized. So we don't have British Columbia, Saskatchewan, Alberta, Manitoba. We don't have those provinces yet. We don't even have Ontario yet. We just have Canada. Well, what do? Because this French-speaking Canada with its French-speaking population is now part of the British Empire. So if you're Britain, how do you assimilate Quebec into your empire? So by assimilate, I mean, how do you graft them in? How do you connect them to the empire, both culturally, meaning, hey, they need to speak the same language, have the same values, as well as economically? How do you assimilate this province into the rest of your empire? Well, Britain, their plan to begin with was this. Okay, we'll ban the French language, we'll ban Catholicism because most French people were Catholic. So remember the two branches of Christianity we talked about, the Catholic branch and the Protestant branch? Well, most people from France or who were connected with the French Empire are going to be Catholic. So they banned the French language and they banned Catholicism. They also made English law. That was going to be the civil code and the criminal code. That was going to all be based on English law instead of off of French law. Now, sounds like, okay, that would make sense. You have a new empire coming in. This is what the people would have to do. But the problem was this. You did not have nearly enough British colonists moving into this area. So there was no way that you're going to have English-speaking British colonists outnumbering the French-speaking colonists. And after a few years, they realized, this is not going to work. Because the French-speaking population is still the majority, and this just makes them angrier. And so they're really not working with us, and this could cause a problem. And especially with the American Revolution brewing down here in the 13 colonies, the last thing Britain wanted was an angry French population saying, hey, you know what? Hey, I think we'll just join these guys. So to keep that from happening, they went ahead and did this. The Quebec Act. All right, so the Quebec Act, I didn't put the year, but the year is 1774. So the Quebec Act was passed in 1774. And so it does these three things. It basically distilled it down to three things for us. Number one, let Quebec citizens keep their language and religious freedom. Number two, English law would be used for criminal cases, but the civil code of Quebec would still be based off of French law. That's the easiest way to say it, and I won't get into the weeds and the details of what is the English law versus the French law. You just need to know, okay, criminal cases are based on English law and tradition, whereas the normal everyday life of someone in Quebec is going to be, the laws are going to be based off of the French code, the French traditions, all right? The French laws, I should say. Now, these are the two that are going to be the main things that we talk about with Quebec and why Quebec is the way it is today. This third point, this is going to tick off the American colonists. So even though this video isn't on the American colonists, we should at least talk about this. It put the Ohio Valley under Quebec's control. So basically the Quebec Act extends Quebec into this area, the Ohio River Valley, right? And also it makes this area, especially a little bit to the south, Indian land. And it bars the American colonists from going into the Ohio River Valley. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if you're thinking, wait a second, Didn't Mr. McGee say in the last video that the French and Indian War started because of a battle for started because of arguments about who would control the Ohio River Valley? The American colonists wanted to move westward into the Ohio River Valley. The French Canadians wanted to move, or I shouldn't say French Canadians at the time, but the French wanted to move into the Ohio River Valley from Canada. And we said there was a whole 9-year French and Indian War because of that? Well, yes. So think about it. All of a sudden American colonists are looking going, wait, what? We just fought for 9 years. I lost my brother, I lost my son, I lost my dad for the Ohio River Valley. And now the government of Britain is saying that we can't even move in and we're barred from moving in there. And they've given it to the French-speaking province of Quebec, which for them was the same as, you basically just gave this to France. So that's going to make them angry. And so the Quebec Act will be listed in a list of acts or a list of laws called the Intolerable Acts. And so the Quebec Act is there, and that just furthers the division between the American colonists and Britain, and eventually leads to the American Revolution. Now, that's something that you need to know. Trust me, it should show up again with any decent U.S. history high school teacher that you should have, all right? We are going to focus on numbers 1 and 2, though, because this is our Canada unit. Now remember, Quebec citizens, they get to keep their language and religious freedom. Most of French society, other than when they're doing criminal trials, is going to be based on the French laws, the French Civil Code, okay? Now, why is that important? Because by passing the Quebec Act, Quebec begins to grow and continue to grow as a French-speaking, French culture province. Even though, eventually what's going to happen is this province will be split up and we'll end up calling it Lower Canada because the St. Lawrence River flows this way. So this is Lower Canada, the lower end of the river. And this will be Upper Canada. And Upper Canada will eventually become Ontario, and that's where English-speaking British subjects will go. And eventually, as Canada continues to grow, all the other provinces are going to be English-speaking. The problem is, you have with Quebec an entire French culture that's growing and growing, and the more years that go by, the more that culture becomes French and has its own traditions. And when I say it becomes French, obviously they are French, but it has its traditions and continues to grow and grow and become more different from the rest of Canada. And here's the reason why I say trouble, because obviously someone who lives in Quebec would go, what are you talking about? What do you mean it's trouble that this is happening? This was a good thing. The trouble that I'm talking about is not side. I'm not taking a side on whether Quebec should be X or whether Quebec should be Y, meaning should they be French, should they be English. The trouble develops because we have a culture that's completely different from the rest of Canada. So, here is a prediction I want you to make. And this is going to be your assignment. You're going to make a prediction. What do you think is going to happen in the 1980s and the 1990s because of this Quebec Act, where you're going to have one French culture amidst everybody else in Canada who speaks English? What do you think this is going to lead to? It's going to lead to some trouble, but I want you to guess, what is the trouble going to be? All right? By the way, as long as you make the prediction, you're good. Now, I mean, listen, unless your prediction is space aliens will come and Darth Vader will lead the revolution. If you put that down, I'm giving you a 0, all right? But what I'm saying is, if you look and go, all right, based on what Mr. McGee said, the Quebec Act builds French culture in Quebec and basically solidifies it, so that people who live in Quebec are going to have a totally different culture, totally different traditions from the rest of Canada. What problem is going to develop when you have a totally different culture from the rest of Canada? What problem will develop in the 1980s and the 1990s because you have a completely different culture from the rest of Canada? So, just to say it one more time for you, what problem will develop in the 1980s and the 1990s because you have a completely separate culture in Quebec from the rest of Canada? Make your prediction, go ahead and submit that prediction to me. And again, as long as your prediction is not something crazy, you should be good, all right? But I want you to think about it. Don't swing to the other extreme and go, well, if it's not crazy, I'll just write anything. I won't think about it. I want you to think about it. I want to see how close can you come to the actual events that we'll talk about in the next video. And don't cheat. Don't look at the next video, okay? See how good you are at guessing what's going to happen, okay? And then we'll talk about it in the next video, all right? If you have any questions, I'll be on conference. All right? Let me know if you need anything. Take care.